Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonathan Tepperman, Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs. I don't know if you could hear while we were getting seated, there was some controversy because while it looks to me like John McCain is on my right to all of you, it looks like he's sitting farthest to the left. I want you to know from our perspective, things are clear. I just want to start by echoing the comments that Gideon Rose made last night about how delighted Foreign Affairs is to be participating in the Halifax Forum for the first time this year. It's a spectacular event, and I want to thank Minister McKay, the Government of Canada, all the wonderful workers for the forum, and all of you for making this possible. The senators need no introduction, so I'm going to skip right over that. I'm just going to speak very briefly to frame the debate and then ask them a few questions and turn things over to you. Our topic is the United States in 2012, superpower, super enabler, or stay-at-home parent. The short version of what that means is what will U.S. foreign policy look like next year and in the years ahead. The slightly more elaborate version, and going by the three options that our title lays out, is are we going to see option A, more of the same, that is superpower stewardship like the United States has pursued for 60 years? Are we going to see something more constrained on, say, the Libya model, call it leading from behind or whatever cliche you prefer? Or are we going to see something even much more limited, an America that retrenches, an America that folds its tents and goes home, a country that dramatically reduces its international profile? Now, we don't have to limit it to just those three options, but I want to start with those. I also want to make one stipulation before we start the conversation, that we should try, I think, insofar as it's possible, to talk about this without getting into the election too much, for two reasons. One, because none of us know what's going to happen, and two, because most of the constraints facing the country, whether it's budgets, whether it's a population that seems to be losing its appetite for foreign adventures, or whether it's an international environment less conducive to the United States playing its traditional superpower role. All of those conditions will obtain no matter who is in the Oval Office in January 2013. So with that understood, let me turn it over first to you, Senator McCain, and ask what we're going to see next year and in the years ahead.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for being a part of this important gathering, and thank you, Peter, again for inviting us, and thanks to all the good citizens of Halifax who have been so kind to us, and I intend to eat lobster at every meal. So,
You're required now, actually.
I think it's very likely, option B, that as you described, a more constrained America. I think that that's probably appropriate given a lot of the domestic challenges that we face. As we all know, we are in probably the most severe recession since the Great Depression. We do have friends and allies throughout the world that in some respects, if you mentioned Libya, are willing to take up part of the burden. Let me tell you just briefly what bothers me and what I worry about, and that is a isolationist America. We've always had tensions in America between isolationism and multinationalism, especially in the Republican Party. You could go back to Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, the pre-World War II isolationists, to the huge fight that we in our party had following World War II between the Eisenhower wing of our party and the Taft wing. And recently, as a result of the 2010 elections, we have seen a dramatic rise in isolationism, withdraw from everywhere, what's the use of foreign aid, all those symptoms only back in spades. Now, part of that is because of the focus, understandably, on domestic issues. The 2010 election wasn't waged on any national security or foreign policy issue. It was on jobs and the economy. But it has given rise to behavior that frankly disturbs me. When we were going through the Libya situation, the United States House of Representatives passed a resolution saying, stay out of Libya, have nothing to do with it. I mean, that disturbed me as much as anything in recent years. So it's a job of people like us and our friends, but particularly guys like me and Mark and Lindsey Graham. By the way, Lindsey was so I say, made some news here last year about what we needed to do about Iran. And, if he came here this year and said the same thing, it would be much less controversial. So maybe he was prescient. But I think the point is that it's a job of some of us, including the President of the United States, to talk to the American people that isolationism and withdrawal to Fortress America doesn't work. And we still have a multitude of challenges, not the least of which is the threat of radical extremism and their desire to do damage to the United States of America and all that we stand for and believe in.
Senator Udall, I'd like you to jump in. And I'd like to add one thing to the question, which is, I know you're not a proxy for the president, but you are a Democrat. What do you imagine an Obama foreign policy looking like before and after the election?
Let me set that aside for a second and then add to what John had to say. There are isolationist wings in both parties. And that's been a long American, if not tradition, certainly a strain of thinking in both parties. But John's completely on point. We need the passionate moderates in both parties, if that isn't an oxymoron, to apply some of their thinking and their attention to the international scene. We are truly linked together. America's been well served when we've been in a leadership role, however you want to describe it. I come from a large family, and I look at the list of roles that we could play here, and I think of us as being a super big brother, not in the Orwellian sense, but in the sense of lending support to the family of nations, to our brothers and sisters, if we could use that construct. And when you're an elder brother like I am in my own family, you give a word of encouragement. You occasionally extend a loan to your siblings. You might even give them a $100 bill, John, if they're hitting the road and need some immediate support. But because America is going through some tough economic times, some of you use the lethal economic term this morning. We're in a lethal economic environment. I think everything you all think about, whether you're an American or whether you're from Europe or from other parts of the world, is America's economic situation is serious. We have a gap we haven't seen since the Great Depression between revenues and expenditures. Until we find our way forward, we are going to be a little bit hesitant. And you combine that with what's a general war weariness among our public, combined with a tough economic situation. I think it's understandable the kinds of debates that we're having. But when we, and I say when, not if, but when we find the right kind of mix, and John and Jean and I talked about this on the way up here yesterday, of spending cuts, which we have to undertake, the strengthening applications that we'll put forth for our entitlement programs, and then additional revenues, and I think you'll see America's policy commitment unleashed again and more active and proactive. Democracies go through periods of re-entrenchment where we're reactive, and then we have opportunities where we can be proactive. Right now we're re-entrenching. We've been reactive, but I wouldn't count America out here by any means.
Could I just add very
Please.
quickly? I wouldn't count America out either. I think that's been, people do that at great risk, but I do admit a war weariness on the part of the American people, which means that I do not see a scenario where we would put boots on the ground. Now, there's lots of ways to counter the challenges that we face around the world, but there is definitely a war weariness which would, the American people would be very reluctant to enter into another Iraq or Afghanistan.
So that means you see no military engagement in Iran or Syria next year?
I think if we reacted to Iran, that it would be hopefully multilateral, but it might not be in the form of a ground invasion. But there's so many variables involved in that it would be hard for me to predict exactly how we would react to a conflict or conduct a conflict with Iran.
I want to push you a bit on the technical question of how you do it all, even in a more limited way. We already have $450 billion of defense cuts on the books, and I know the next panel is going to get into this further, but I think we have to touch on it briefly. If the super committee doesn't come in with a recommendation next week, then we're facing more automatic cuts. Barney Frank, who I spoke to earlier in the week, is calling for $100 billion cuts in annual defense spending. Now, the defense secretary, when he spoke on Friday, said he refused to believe that we need to make a choice between national defense and fiscal responsibility. But how do you square the circle?
It's very difficult. First of all, I agree with Secretary Panetta, who made the case right here in Halifax that the sequestration would give us a military that with the smallest Air Force ever, the smallest Army since 1915, and the smallest Navy since 1940. We cannot afford that. So I think you would see some adjustments in the case of sequestration. And you're right, we cut $20 billion this year. We have $480 billion in planned cuts. Secretary Gates already enforced about $80 billion in cuts, so they are significant. And I'm not one who blames everything on fraud, abuse, and waste, but I am one who says that we can fix our acquisition process. The F-35 is the issue that's come up and is very important here in Canada because of the cost overruns. We have to fix the way we acquire weapon systems and do it in a way that is just not wasteful and characterized by cost overruns. I think the other thing is there is obviously going to have to be a review of roles and missions in light of the new world order, and in light, especially, it was mandated no matter what the budgetary constraints were, about the tectonic shift of the world's economy to Asia Pacific. I applaud the president's agreement with the Australians, just that he announced a couple of days ago. I would like to see more of that throughout the Pacific region. Not a base with hospitals and schools and dependents and all that, but the kind of joint operating base where we could work with our allies, come in, operate, train, and leave. So I think that whatever the physical constraints are, I think as we draw down out of Iraq and Afghanistan, for better or worse, that our attention will shift to the Asia-Pacific region.
Well, let me follow up on that point, if I may, because one obvious way to cut costs quickly and dramatically is by getting our actual combat troops home. You've been critical of the administration's decision to pull all troops out of Iraq by the end of the year. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, in case you missed the front page of the Wall Street Journal yesterday, you'll see that there are significant tensions in Kirkuk, just as I predicted. Not just me, but all of us who understand the situation there. The Iraqi airspace will be completely unprotected for a long period of time. And it's pretty obvious that the Iraqis do not have the technical counter-insurgency skills that we do. I won't go through all the details about it with you, but the president, following our facts, the fact is the President of the United States campaigned in 2008 for President of the United States and said he would get all American troops out of Iraq. He has fulfilled that campaign promise, and I think we risk great danger of having those over 4,400 young Americans who gave their lives in behalf of that effort now in jeopardy.
Now, part of the reason for the departure is that the Iraqis wouldn't sign an immunity agreement.
That's just pure fallacy. First of all, we have 40,000 some troops in Kuwait. We never put it through their parliament. Second of all, it was clear that we never gave the Iraqis a number and a mission of the number of troops that we wanted there. How could we expect them to agree to something that we didn't know the number? I'll give you one brief anecdote. Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Lieberman, and I are in a meeting with Prime Minister Maliki. We were talking to him about the importance of having troop people remain behind. This is last May. This is an actual occasion. And Prime Minister Maliki turned and said, "How many troops do you want?" We turned to General Austin and said, "How many troops do we want?" "Well, we're still working on that." That was last May. We're still working on that. We never gave the Iraqis a number of troops, and it, as in the words of General Dempsey in testimony before the Armed Services Committee the other day, it cascaded down from 20,000 to 15,000 to 13,000 to 10,000 to 5,000 to 3,000. So now we're in a situation where we'll leave 16,000 Americans left behind in Iraq, State Department personnel and, quote, contract security people. And I'll be darned if I think the American people are ready to pay for that. And second of all, I have great curiosity as to how we ensure their security.
Senator Udall, do you want to touch on that?
The President did make such a promise. I mentioned the American public has more than a little war weariness. I respect Senator McCain's analysis of the situation. I don't think, though, that shuts us out. This recent decision shuts us out of continuing to have a strong relationship with Iraq and its government and its people. We, as Senator McCain pointed out, we do have troops stationed quietly in a number of the Gulf states. We are in Afghanistan with our forces there for the foreseeable future. But the situation in particular, let me end on this note, in Kirkuk has long concerned all of us. And the fact that we couldn't drive an agreement as to whether we'd have a plebiscite or some sort of power showering agreement in the northern part of Iraq is, I think, both a comment on our focus, but also the Iraqi government's struggles to come to some sort of an agreement given their historic tribal rivalries and the division of power that exists in the various regions of Iraq.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up to the floor now for questions. Please. You, sir, in the back, just wait for the microphone, please.
Peter Jennings from Australia. Gentlemen, can I ask you to make some comments about how you see the evolving relationship between the US and China, in particular on the balance of military forces in North Asia? And what would your recommendations be to the American government about how to shape its priorities in dealing with China in the coming years?
John. The overarching approach that I think we should be taking to China is that we ought to collaborate, communicate, compete economically, even militarily, but we ought to think through what sorts of conflicts, particularly military, we're willing to consider. The President, as you know, is in near Asia as we speak. He has been these last few days. And as Senator McCain mentioned, this new arrangement with Australia is an important one. The trade proposals that are on the table that would include Japan, I think would be a powerful part of having a presence in Asia. We also need to, I think, continue to push the Chinese to comply with the trade agreements we have with them. I was there a year ago, and I can tell you it was beyond aggravating. I don't know how many business people are here that I had to not only turn my BlackBerry off, but get a new one when I got home because of the general knowledge of their intellectual piracy efforts. I want to be diplomatic here. There's a concept, as you know, called indigenous innovation that the Chinese are applying in many ways, which is you give us your patents and your knowledge, and we'll allow you to set up a manufacturing plant here and sell into our markets. At some point, we have to draw the line and say enough is enough. We've had a big debate about currency and encouraging the Chinese, shall we say, to let their currency rise as other countries do, or float, I should say float on the currency markets. But there's I'll cede the floor, but there are a lot of levels to this and a lot of elements to this. But I think we've got to stand our ground with China. We have a partnership with them, but I think there are times when we let ourselves be pushed around that in the end isn't helpful to all of us, whether it's the United States or other parts of the world.
Senator McCain, as you begin to answer, I'd like to ask, the Chinese obviously are not happy with this new basing agreement in Australia for predictable reasons. Do you think the current U.S. policy, which is a sort of soft balancing of China, talking in a collaborative way, but also striking closer and closer relationships with the nervous countries on China's periphery and moving assets into the neighborhood is the right way to go?
Jonathan, I think that's exactly the right way to go. And I think that Chinese behavior has alarmed countries in the region to an extent that they are at least considering the kind of alliance or agreement we just made with Australia. A lot of them aren't there yet, but the more that the Chinese act in a sometimes confrontational fashion, such as the conflict they had with Japan a year or so ago, again, makes these people very wary. I don't believe there's going to be a conflict with China. I've never believed that. But I think the best way to prevent that is to show strong agreements, alliances ranging from free trade agreements, as the president also suggested in the region, to this kind of alignment, not a NATO alignment, but certainly a coalition where we would have greater military cooperation. Our new best friends, the Vietnamese, are also very interested in that, given their proximity. By the way, there's a ship, a destroyer, that's based in Japan, named after my father and grandfather, which paid a port visit to Da Nang not long ago, which shows that if you live long enough, anything can happen in this world. But I think that this is also based on this recognition, one, that the world's economy has shifted to Japan, Asia, and second, that the Chinese view the last 200 years as an aberration of history, and that their role in Asia is one of dominance. I don't mean warfare, but the dominant power in Asia, and they are really sort of fulfilling that what they believe is their ages-old position in Asia. Lee Kuan Yew once told me that, he said the Chinese, his words, not mine, he said the Chinese will build up enough in the Western Pacific to the point where they will ask you to leave. And that again, that was his statement, not mine. But when you look at some of the significant military buildup and the kinds of military buildup that the Chinese are engaged in, again, I do not envision a conflict with China, but I do see a situation where tensions could rise.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah.
Hello, Vago Moradian from Defense News. Gentlemen, I mean, obviously it's budget cutting season right now. As you're looking at, and the Pentagon is going through a series of reviews to shape U.S. forces and what they should look like. What do you guys think U.S. forces should look like? What kind of capabilities do we need to have? That's the first part of the question. The second is there's a huge amount of pressure to pull U.S. troops out of Europe. What are your guys' views on that? How many troops should remain in Europe? Or how should they be distributed worldwide?
Can I get back to you on that? More seriously, I think that the important consideration as we grapple with a very difficult budget situation, again, I'm just going to underline that you've got to see everything we're doing through that lens right now, is that the numbers shouldn't drive strategy, the numbers shouldn't drive doctrine. And that's also easy to say, but it's really important to take those steps. And we have leadership that has the capacity to do that. We've got to see what they produce, but starting with Secretary of Defense, the new chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Dempsey, and others who are going through that exercise right now. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, you have to look at the costs that are tied to the Pentagon on the personnel side, and there where you see some of the greatest increases. And if a way to get a handle on those includes drawing down some of our forces in some parts of the world, then we're going to have to consider that. But we want to do that in concert with our allies. We want to do that in concert, in particular, with the Germans, the South Koreans, and others who can really give us a sense of how we team up, share the burden, which is really in some ways the theme of this conversation this afternoon, the theme of the entire forum is how do we do, like our Marines do more with less.
I continue to worry about the continued decline in defense spending by our European and NATO allies. And I'll say very frankly, I was very disappointed in the German decision not to take part in assistance for the liberation of Libya. It's not so much the numbers of our troops in Europe that concerns me, it's the roles and missions. We're going to have to reshape the roles and missions of our troops in Europe and around the world in recognition of the new areas of concern. 20 years ago, we were not concerned about Africa. Right now, we are deeply concerned about Africa. and not only because of the tremendous humanitarian side of it, but the fertile ground for Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations as these failed states continue to cause us enormous challenges, from the pirates that continue to hijack tankers and ships to the divisions within these countries which break up more and more along tribal lines. So it seems to me that our evaluation is to have a strong NATO and maintain a strong NATO and even an expanded NATO, but recognize that counterinsurgency and counterterrorism is now our highest priorities as we address the challenges of the 21st century.
John, if I could add, I think one area in which we really have to have a focused discussion is the size of our Navy, capacity of our Navy, given what we just talked about in regards to the Pacific, the South China Sea. And so I think you're going to see that kind of discussion be front and center. And I'll look.
He's terribly eager to follow up.
All right.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
What sort of broader capabilities do we need to maintain? What are sort of
A lot of it lies in technology. At this gathering 10 years ago, we would never have envisioned the capabilities that we have in as far as drones are concerned. I believe that the F-35 will probably be the last manned fighter aircraft. We will have manned airplanes, but probably the last fighter aircraft that of any significance that will be developed. The new areas of technology that we have are astounding. We won the Battle of Sadr City through technology and brave men and women. But David Petraeus won that battle and, in his words, made them take a knee, because we kept an eye on every single one of them every minute of every day until they got tired of getting killed. And that's the kind of use of technology that I think that we're going to have to emphasize in the future.
You, ma'am, please.
Helga Flores with Brookings. Since this conference is taking place in Halifax, I would like to turn your attention to the Americas and the security situation in the Americas. Anne-Marie Slaughter previously pointed out to the situation in Mexico and most of all in Central America. I wonder, how concerned are you about what's taking place there, about the narco cartels taking over already very weak countries in Central America? Secretary Clinton talked about the core responsibility of the U.S. And so how concerned are you, and what does this mean, this core responsibility? What are the policies that the U.S. could improve?
I'm deeply concerned, and by the way, my friend Mark Udall grew up in Arizona before his desertion to Colorado, so he is very familiar with it. I think it's the most underreported aspect of events in the world today. My friends, when people are slaughtering people and beheading them and hanging their bodies from bridges and putting the face of people on a soccer ball, I mean, this is a level of brutality that is probably not exceeded any place in the world. It has fractured Mexican society, and it is really an existential threat in some ways to the very government of Mexico. I can tell you that our cooperation and our efforts with Mexico have dramatically increased. They have been much more. We are doing things with Mexicans that for 10 years ago they'd never have considered. But this is something that is of the utmost criticality. And let me just say that we have to have a discussion in the United States of America about who's creating the demand for this drug, for these drugs, and the reason why they come across, and the reason why people kill others and do all the things they do is to get that product into the United States of America, and we're going to have to recognize that, and we're going to have a national discussion about it. And so the next election in Mexico, which is coming up very soon, may elect a president who has a different view about the war on drugs than President Calderon has. And so I'm very concerned about it. They're our closest and dearest neighbor, and we are going to have to, I think, have a national discussion about the issue of drugs and, frankly, the issue of border security as well.
Might I add just two short
Please.
comments? I share Senator McCain's perspective. General Jacoby has been here at the conference. He heads our Northern Command. He's intimately involved in this effort. And Senator McCain...
And I think he'll tell you that, isn't right, General? The level of cooperation
is really...
with the Mexicans is
Yeah.
at the highest that it's been.
And we do have a responsibility on our side of the board to understand in part why this has developed, and we need to work in equal partnership with the Mexican government and the Mexican people. I think we can hold out perhaps Colombia as an example of some of the approaches that can be used successfully. And I would then add, because I think so much of our security discussion these days is tied to economic drivers, that the passage finally, John would say, of the Colombian Free Trade Agreement is an important part of taking on these forces of nihilism and chaos and violence.
Could I finally mention again the obvious? When we're dealing with this kind of money, corruption is a huge problem. And it is a problem on both sides of the border, not just on the southern side.
The questions are starting to pile up, so I'm going to take them in swatches and then...
In other words, shorten our answers.
Exactly.
There you go.
Couldn't put it better myself. So let's start with
Okay.
the gentleman there in the fourth row, then Steve Clemens, then you, sir, in the second row, and then the lady in the back. So we need a mic here, please. If I've just insulted someone all the way in the back, I apologize. I didn't see you.
Thank you very much, Saeed Jawad from Afghanistan. Senator, getting back to your comments about Iraq. We are having discussions, presence of Minister McKay, who lost 150 very fine soldiers in Afghanistan, to which we are very grateful. In the United States, probably 10 times that number, on one hand. On the other hand, in Afghanistan today, Aloya Jirga actually decided very decisively to seek a strategic partnership with the United States, even offered actually basis for a quite long-term period. On the other hand, on all the debates, either Afghanistan is absent or most of the deadlines about Afghanistan ends in 2014. In order to sustain some of the gains that's been made and prevent some of our neighbors to think that the United States is packing and leaving, would it be possible to formulate a long-term strategy considering the constraint that we were just discussing about the internal debates that are going on?
Thank you. Please.
I agree with Steve Clemens of the Atlantic Monthly. I agree with Senator McCain that the rise of isolationism and those who have disdain for international alliances and international deals and institutions is growing in the United States. But when you look at America's engagement with the world, in line with the topic of this session, in 1985, the U.S. share of global GDP was about 33% of the world, and our defense expenditures were about that same amount. Today, we're about 22% of global GDP and about half of what the world spends on defense, and that's unsustainable. And what it seems is that you're at a point in our history where Americans feel that the benefits that they used to get from a very robust global engagement are a lot less than we used to have. That the terms of trade, that shaping institutions, that benefits for American workers in the older era were far greater. That China benefits much more significantly in today's order than we do. And you can find silly examples like Afghanistan or other, but I think generally China's making the economic weather in the world today. We're making the military weather, and there seems to be a disconnect. And so I think that may help explain some of this greater disregard for the quid pro quos that the U.S. should get. And I think that in that, if that is true, then coming back to this question of what is the future of U.S. engagement in the world, are we going to be stay-at-home moms? Are we going to do more robust engagement? I'd love to hear the senators think about what the United States needs to essentially get from the rest of the world to justify the deeper kinds of engagement both of you seem to be calling for.
You, sir, please.
That's a great. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Taking notes.
Taking them down.
I think it's the common term I have heard during the last 2 days is freedom. And freedom should be indivisible. I'm Palestinian. I have been living under the Israeli occupation for 43 years. Our people have been refugees for 63 years. I was the first Palestinian who landed in Madrid for the peace talks. I did not have gray hair. I was not married. Now I have gray hair and I have 3 kids. The peace process has been ongoing for 20 years. The Israeli occupation has not ended. We have decided to go to United Nations as a multilateral forum, a peaceful measure. United States has decided to use a veto against our measure. I hope the gentlemen, our colleagues here, they appeal to the administration to reconsider its position on this question of Palestine. My question to you is that, is it possible for NATO, United States, to use or send troops to the Palestinian territories as a transitional arrangement to replace the Israeli occupying forces? And also, what do you say to the Palestinian people in a regional transformation? What sort of message both of you can say to the Palestinian people? How is it possible to regenerate hope for people who are under occupation for 43 years?
Thank you very much. The lady in the back, please. Please.
Thank you very much. Scotty Greenwood from Washington, D.C. I have a question in particular for Senator McCain. Before I ask it, as an American, I just have to say thank you so much for your service to our country. Here's my question. So here's my question. A lot of presidential campaigns and a lot of foreign policy talks from both parties talks about reducing our dependence on foreign oil. You could substitute for the word foreign on unstable, unfriendly oil, because I don't think when people say that they really mean Canadian oil. And so I just wanted to ask your perspective, given the Canadian resources and understanding that we'd like to transition to a low-carbon economy ultimately, but we're not there yet. We're stuck with oil for a while. What you make of the Obama administration's recent decision to kind of delay deciding on the big proposed Canadian oil pipeline that would bring resources from Canada into the United States. Would just be interested in your perspective, given the years of due diligence done by the State Department and others on the project. Thanks.
Oh, okay, gentlemen. Our questions are, what long-term role in Afghanistan? How do we get more bang for our buck in our international spending? And what do we ask for from our allies and partners that we're not getting? A U.S. role, including a U.S. military role in Palestine. And what do you think about the Keystone Pipeline?
Thanks, John.
And you can do it with a single answer.
Yes, no, yes, no. Let me start with the easy one, the Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah.
It strikes me that there were some legitimate concerns in certain parts of the Midwest about water supplies and this precious aquifer, the Ogallala Aquifer. Those who are entrusted with making the decision have gone back to work. I'm hopeful that we can find a solution that speaks, Scotty, to the concerns of people involved. It does seem to me in the end that for producing oil on our continent, we ought to put it to use here. If only you consider costing out the energy used to move that oil to another part of the world as a starting point. Whether the decision gets made in the near term or it takes a bit longer, I'm confident the decision will get made. I know it's been too long to our Canadian brothers and sisters who have operated, they believe in good faith, and have been producing a resource that's very, very valuable, as you know. The only other liquid that's more valuable is H2O itself. So thank you for that question. Steve, I wish I had the quick answer for you because, and again, I want to be diplomatic. China, while America has been working across the globe to ensure stability, enhance freedom, promote economic development, has been pursuing its own interests. It has 1.2 billion people. It's had some remarkable success. About a quarter, maybe a third of the Chinese citizens now have a lower to middle class standard of living. That's good news. That's good news for all of us. How do we draw them into the global security architecture so that they pay their fair share is a big and important question. And I think John put his finger on it when he discussed the Pacific Rim. Hopefully I did as well in suggesting that we need to pursue as much communication and collaboration with them as we possibly can. We also have to let them know that we're aware of what they're doing. We know their history, and that our allies in the region, from the Indonesians to the Filipinos to the Indians, all the way through Southeastern Asia, are important and need to be respected as well.
Senator McCain, because we're running out of time, let me ask you to address a long-term
Sure.
role for Afghanistan, U.S. troops in Palestine.
Just very quickly, of course, I think it was a mistake to cancel the pipeline. That on the issue of the Palestinians, I know this is a bit out of the box, but I think there's one man in the world who could probably bring Israelis and Palestinians together, and that's former President Bill Clinton. You're not going to gain anything by going to the UN for membership. All you do is force more cutoff of U.S. money to the UN. That'll be the only result of it. And I would like to see perhaps a unification of the Palestinians, both at Gaza and on the West Bank, so we would know who to negotiate with. And I hope that I can assure you the United States troops will not be there. On the issue of the Afghan situation, I again worry about the withdrawal. No military person recommended the withdrawal before we finish the fighting season of 2012, but I am basing some of my hopes on a strategic agreement, a long-term strategic agreement with Afghanistan where we could maintain some bases and we would give them assurances of our commitment to their long-term security. Let me just finally, in the way to on the question, first of all, we don't choose the battlefield, our enemies do. And so we have to plan for a lot of contingencies as to sometimes what our clouded foresight provides us with. But I think that we are going to be faced with the kind of instability such as we're seeing in Africa today and other parts of the world, which gives rise and a breeding ground for terrorism and those who would practice those kinds of tactics. But let me also say, the Arab Spring is misnamed because it's not just Arab. The Arab Spring will spread throughout the world. A version of it is even spread to the United States of America in the form of the, quote, Tea Partiers and the occupiers. There's great unrest even in the United States of America today. The Arab Spring, in my view, will affect people in the Kremlin, in Beijing, and in every country in the world where people don't have freedom. And so I am optimistic. I am optimistic that this incredible tectonic, historic change that's taken place in the Arab world will affect the entire world. Just as last year at this meeting, Ben Ali was in power, Gaddafi was in power, Mubarak was in power, and today Assad is in power. It would not surprise me in the slightest next year when we are here enjoying a lobster that Mr. Assad will no longer be in power in Syria. And other things that we did not predict last year will happen between now and the next time we're together.
Namely events in Beijing or Moscow?
I don't know, but I think that there's great dissatisfaction in Russia today. The Chinese must worry about something when 5 demonstrators get together and they have a couple of hundred police crack down on them and crack their heads, where they try to censor the internet, where they are doing all of the things they're doing to repress people who once have achieved, and history shows us, you reach a certain level of economic development and then you seek other things. Mm-hmm. And that's what they are they're facing now today. And I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm not saying it's going to happen by the time we're back here next year, but I am saying that it's an inexorable trend which is encircling this globe, which I think will have a world emerge that is better, safer, more democracy, and people will be able to realize their God-given rights as never before.
Should we be helping Democrats in China and Russia in ways we aren't currently?
I think we should certainly be complaining about the kinds of repression that is being enacted in China. I think we should be trying to help people find ways around censorship. I think we should be doing those things, but encouraging revolt, no, obviously, but I think that we could certainly give them moral support. The fact that we did not give the Iranian, when a young woman named Netta bled to death in the street in Tehran, and we refused to give our moral support to the demonstrators in Iran, would go down as one of the great mistakes in the history of the 21st century.
Thank you. Time is short, so quick questions, please, starting here, and then to the gentleman there.
Brian Katula, Center for American Progress. Thank you for your public service, both of you. 3 years into the Obama administration, what would you say is the most positive surprise that you didn't expect from it? And what's the biggest disappointment? Because you both speak eloquently about individual issues, but when you look at the totality, the big picture, what's the thing that pleasantly surprised you the most that you didn't expect, and then the biggest disappointment?
Thank you. You, sir, please.
I'm from the Brookings Institution. We have been talking about the world for the last 24 hours, and I'm surprised that we didn't talk about the single biggest problem that we are facing, and that's climate change. Now, US is secure because it has a lot of military might, but it's also secure because the world respects you for your moral authority. 20 years down the road, if the world decides that you were the country that could have but did not solve the climate change problem, will you be equally secure?
The lady just across the aisle, please. Here. Thank you.
So much. Heather Hurlbert from the National Security Network in Washington. Senator McCain, if a year from now the West Bank and Gaza do have an effective unity government, will you, over lobster dinner, agree that the U.S. should talk to Hamas? And I'd like to invite you both to comment on what Minister Barak had to say about Iran, specifically in the light of the number of military and intelligence officials in the U.S. and Israel who have expressed very deep reservations about both the effects and the effectiveness on a military strike on Iran. As you think about that, how will you take into account what we're hearing from General Zinni, Admiral Fallon, Admiral Mullen, Israeli intelligence about the likelihood that this, number one, won't work, and number two, will have unpredictable consequences?
Thank you, Heather. You, sir, please.
My name is Song from South Korea. Long story, but to make it quite short. First question is why the United States does not try to include China in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP agreements. And second one is why United States does not engage in active multilateral diplomacy like six-party talks on North Korean nuclear issue, to which the Obama administration responded with some policy of doing nothing under the name of strategic patience.
Thank you.
And then I have the third point is, this is, I think it is related to Senator McCain. If I'm not mistaken, you along with other senators proposed in the Senate to review the whole American process basing in East Asia, including Japan and Korea. For example, my country has been investing almost $10 billion for the new basis for American process. And then now when you suggest this kind of review of this stationing, then people in my country would think that the United States can anytime move its goalpost. How do you think you can say that United States is Pacific power and United States is a staying power?
Gentlemen, easy questions to answer in 7 minutes. If you're ready, the best and the worst of the Obama administration, climate change. Are you going to speak to Hamas? Should the United States government speak to Hamas? You can throw in Iran if you'd like. Why are we not including China in trade agreements? And why are we not engaging in active diplomacy with North Korea?
Let me take a few runs at a few of those questions and make sure Senator McCain has the last word. As far as the TPP proposal goes, China is invited to participate, but there are rules and expectations that have to be met, as I understand what we're proposing. As far as the six-party talks go, I think we, as America, and you representing South Korea and the other partners, the talks have come at this from every which direction. You live in the neighborhood. We look to you to continue to coach us how we can best, if I can say this, neuter the threat that North Korea represents, and also work towards an ultimate reunification, which is, I think, what everybody prays for in the region. As far as climate change goes, this gentleman is spot on. You'll find very quickly I'm someone who thinks that we should put a price on carbon, that it will actually unleash enormous economic activity, that will be a job engine. We will enhance our national security options. And by the way, we will keep faith with our children and their grandchildren. I think if we don't get on top of this soon, the historians, but even more powerfully, our grandchildren will excoriate us for what we left them. The Obama administration, I may disagree with John here, but I think keeping faith with drawing down in Iraq in a way that gives the Iraqis the opportunity to determine their own future. I take John's concerns about our future involvement there, and I don't think this is the last bite at the apple. I think we have a long now relationship with the Iraqis and their ways to support what they're doing. I think you have to give the Obama administration credit in part, although I don't want to leave this impression that some people had yesterday that somehow it's because of America's great role here that we're triumphant about what's happening in the Middle East. But I think you can argue we and some of our investments, whether it was our relationship with the Egyptian military, our willingness to work within NATO and to bring the Arab League to the table, those are great successes. And we're showing that counterinsurgency and counterterrorism can work together. And I think, although none of us in this room applaud or celebrate the death of another human being, I think the events in Abbottabad tied to Osama bin Laden, events in Yemen, have shown that we're going to quietly find you and hunt you down if you're operating outside the norms of civilized behavior.
By the way, I'm sorry that it took us so long to get Osama bin Laden, but I was glad that he lived long enough to see the Arab Spring, which is a direct repudiation of everything that he advocated and sought. I think the president has grown in office. One of the things I would give him great credit for, as I mentioned, this agreement with Australia, his understanding of the importance of Asia-Pacific region, and clearly his realization of the importance of free trade. On the issue of climate change, the American people aren't going to pay more money in taxes because of climate change. It's a fact. And what we need to do is pursue what many companies and corporations and major industries in America, and that's sustainability. We can emphasize sustainability, and we can not raise people's taxes and not raise costs at the same time. But and I believe that climate change is real, but until we convince the American people that we can attain progress in that area through helping make money, which we certainly can, and rather than spending money, we're not going to be able to achieve much of a result. I heard Admiral Mullen and everybody a lot different than the questioner did. Admiral Mullen and everybody that I know of has said there's only one thing worse than an attack on Iran, and that would be that Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon. I think that is generally accepted opinion because of the disastrous and destabilizing effects it would have on the region. To say that we are taking a military action off the table in the event of whatever the Iranians might be doing, of course, is just, in my view, encouragement to the Iranians to continue their illegal activities. Will the government, United States government, talk to Hamas? I think a lot of that would depend on what Hamas's intentions are. If they're willing to sit down across the table from the Israelis, we should not only talk to them, but we should do everything we can to encourage that process. As you know, the question, we are moving to a new base in South Korea. The United States has maintained its commitment to South Korea and its defense, and I am confident that that will continue. It's a very important place and very important not only as far as U.S.-South Korea is concerned, but the region. 6-party talks, 4-party talks, 3-party talks, 10-party talks, 1-party talks. You know, it's all become almost a joke. It is free lunches for diplomats. You know, and you know, I wish they would meet, for
I thought
example.
that's what this was.
I wish they would. No, I wish they'd meet in Gila Bend, Arizona, in August. I mean, instead of Geneva. I mean, look.
How about Winnipeg in December?
There you go.
The whole problem is that the North Koreans realize that if they give up their nuclear capability, they become about as important in the world as any other small, poor nation. And there is yet to be some kind of sufficient incentive for the North Koreans to do it. After we poured, and the South Koreans, hundreds of $millions in food aid, economic aid, building the industrial city up there across the DMZ, all the things have been done. Tell me how that has changed North Korean behavior for the better. In my view, it has not, and we all know, you and I know what the answer is, and the answer is China. We all talk about how China knows thinks far into the future. The Chinese cannot believe that it is in their interest to have an unstable, aggressive, incredibly oppressive, repressive government of starving people on its southern border. And when the Chinese realize it's not in their interest, then I think we may see some improvement as far as North Korea is concerned. We view South Korea as one of our staunchest and greatest allies. Not only that, the great economic success story of Asia and the world. And so,
on that note, while I've always heard that it's dangerous to come between a politician and his microphone, that was such a brilliant tour of the world by both of you, I think we should end there. So please join me in thanking the two senators.
Thanks for putting up with me, man.
Thanks. That was brilliant.